Good afternoon. I'm Anuj Mehrotra. I'm the Dean of the George Washington University School of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session of George Talks Business. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to all in the community who are serving at the front lines of the pandemic. Today, our guest is Jane Morris, who is the founder and CEO of To The Market. Very recently, the Fortune magazine named her as among the top 25 world's greatest leaders, heroes of the pandemic. Jane, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dean.
And we will get to that part about being named as the top 25 leaders and heroes of the pandemic. But I wanted to start a little bit earlier in your career. Before you founded this company, tell us a little bit about the early career and how you started and what were some of the points that we would like to learn about you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to speak with you. I went to school in Washington, D.C., and really, really think it's such a great place to be able to intern and to be around really extraordinary practitioners. So I recommend D.C. as a great place for anyone who's thinking about college. But I actually started my career in counterterrorism at the U.S. Department of State. And that originated actually from an internship that I began my junior year of college. So again, a great advantage of being in DC. But my focus for the first, 5+ years of my career was in fact national security. And I really believed that I would be working on national security for most of my career, if not the entire career. But what I ended up doing quite early because of, I think, just an interest and a passion as I started focusing on the role of women and the role of women at the time in fighting terrorism. And it really put me on a path for having a passion for understanding the role that women play in civil society, in the national level, on the international level. And that ultimately led me to start working for Secretary Clinton in the Office of Global Women's Issues. And that's where I expanded my portfolio to focus on all things women, peace, and security. So not just counterterrorism, but things like domestic violence, sexual assault, the role of women within security sectors. But all of the while I was working at the State Department, I was getting really interesting feedback about the role that women were playing in these developing economies. And the biggest piece of feedback I was getting from the women that I was working with, including in places like Afghanistan, was, I appreciate your leadership training. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of peace dialogues and to be at the table when we're having conflict resolution. But ultimately, what I'm most interested in is having access to resources. Whether I earn them, I share them, or I inherit them, because it is these access to resources that are actually going to give me the most power. So even though I was focused on national security, a seed was planted that I was interested in job creation and job sustainment.
That's very inspiring, Jane. So, this is something where you started. Not many people start like that, and certainly not many people found a company after that. So I think there was probably some of these things that inspired you to found this company To The Market. Tell us a little bit about that. What inspired you, and how did you decide what kind of a company you wanted to launch?
Well, when I got excited about the idea of job creation and job sustainment for overlooked communities, particularly women, I sort of went down this path of asking myself, well, what would this look like? What are the business models that would allow me to create jobs and sustain jobs at scale? And I wasn't sure what sectors I would be engaged in, what the business model would look like. And so I went to business school. I developed a number of business models, none of which I pursued, but it was a great exercise and getting to see what the capital need would be, how scalable I thought the business model could be. But ultimately, still was not clear what that would look like. So I actually went to go work for Mrs. Cindy McCain at the McCain Institute for International Leadership. And I was asked to lead the human trafficking and labor exploitation work. And that's when I was actually exposed to the retail sector. So the retail sector is one that I certainly never imagined being involved in. But what I learned very quickly is that it's actually the second largest economy in the developing world, where agriculture is the largest, and the retail sector, meaning the manufacturing of product, is in fact the second largest economy. And what I learned is that this is an economy that is dominated by women, and it's dominated by overlooked communities. And there is a lot of opportunity to improve the sector, not only from an operational standpoint, it's slow, there's not a lot of technology associated with the sector, but also it is ripe with labor concerns and it's ripe with environmental concerns. So I thought, okay, here's a great sector for me to get engaged around. It's employing a community that I'd like to be a part of sustaining, and it's a broken sector, meaning that there's an opportunity for us to actually build a scalable business to help address some of the concerns around the way our products are currently being made. And that was sort of the launch point for me saying, I want to start a company called To The Market.
So tell me, it is one thing to have an idea about trying to come up with something like this. It's another thing to really make it a reality and to be successful at it. So tell us some of the things, some of the challenges you faced and some of the considerations you had to make in order to really turn it into a reality.
Well, one of the things that I think is important for anyone who is thinking about starting a business or a nonprofit or even a project within an existing organization is to really ask yourself the why. And it's not just the why of what problem am I addressing, but it's also the why of why am I uniquely qualified to address this issue. I think the most successful entrepreneurs, whether again they're starting a for-profit or not-for-profit organization, or even intrapreneurs, so those who are starting projects within existing organizations, are those that say to themselves, I've identified a problem that needs to be solved, and I also have a specific skill set that can help to address this problem. And where you see that interaction is where I think you see the most power for entrepreneurs. So I really spent, if you think about the time at which the seed was planted, that there was interest in me being a part of creating and sustaining jobs, to the actual launch of the company, where we became a corporation technically in 2016, that was actually almost a decade where I was really thinking about what this business model could look like to be scalable, not only from a financial standpoint, but from a resource standpoint. And so I would encourage anyone who's thinking about that to really take time and reflect on what's the problem I'm trying to solve, and am I the right person to help solve this problem?
I think your answer, Jane, is music to my ears, because you have really just used all of your business education and used that to your advantage in being an entrepreneur like this. Tell us a little bit about the company itself, and let's not talk about post-COVID. Let's talk about the pre-COVID part. Tell us more about To The Market. How many locations do you have? What kind of company do you have? And how many people are working for you?
Sure. So To The Market is a company that has a vision for changing the way that retail manufacturing is done, to empower people and to protect the planet. And so we really see ourselves as a company that has the ability to truly transform the way that American companies and even global companies are able to source and manufacture, so that they're able to access ethical and sustainable suppliers for the products that they want to have created. And so what To The Market has done is we have identified and vetted organizations around the world that we feel like are operating in a way that is better for people and better for the planet. So that might mean that they're fair trade certified, or they're GOTS organic certified, or they're artisan groups, or women owned and operated. And we are then bringing these suppliers, giving them access by democratizing access to the purchasing power of large companies. So if I am a Hilton and I have a vision of bringing more resources to local businesses where I have, let's say, properties, somebody like a To The Market is well positioned to partner with them, because we can say, hey, instead of sourcing the product that you may have been sourcing from, a factory that's disconnected from the properties, your hotel properties, you can in fact source locally with some of To The Market's approved suppliers. And that then helps you not only get product that you need anyways, but actually helps you advance some of your sustainability goals, your corporate social responsibility goals, even some of your UN commitments around local sourcing or around, having less of a carbon footprint, or even empowering women within your supply chain.
So it's a very compelling vision, and it could not have been easy to be able to select some of the partners, some of the suppliers. What was the mechanism of building? You have stated certain points that you were using in terms of determining who those folks should be in your network. How difficult was it to build this network, and how many suppliers do you have in your network now?
Well, we have hundreds of vetted and approved suppliers that sit in over 20 countries, including the United States. And these are all what we describe as non-traditional, meaning that they are suppliers that have traditionally been pushed out of the process by traditional retail brokers. And they have, again, traditionally not had access to bid on and participate in large deals coming from the United States or from other countries. As far as the process of identifying and vetting these suppliers, this again gets back to the question of what's the problem and why am I uniquely positioned to solve it? I was coming from a place of having worked largely in developing communities for years, particularly with a focus on women. I had then gone on to even work more deeply on the issue of human trafficking and labor exploitation. So I had already built trust within communities, for example, across India, Calcutta, New Delhi, Nepal, Kathmandu within Nepal. And I was able to, because of my expertise, build out these vendor relationships because I had the unique background of having already spent time with them in a different format. And so it was really just a function of building off of my previous experience and just engaging them in a different way.
So this is great, Jane, and you have now. I'm looking at it from the perspective of timeline. You have a very compelling vision. You were vetting the retailers. You have built a network, but you still kind of have to create a buzz. And was this buzz easy to create? What were some of the marketing that you had to adopt, and were there some guiding principles even there, which seem to be that your every step in this you are being guided by certain principles? I would love to hear some of the marketing buzz that you created and how.
Well, one of the big lessons that I had to learn coming from a policy background was this idea of how do you speak your value proposition in a way that isn't too academic, but it is in fact sort of universally understood. And so, my sort of inclination was always to try to be hyper specific about the impact we were having, be very, very specific about the type of communities that we were engaging with. And what I found from a marketing standpoint was that oftentimes we were over communicating detail that was sort of then falling on deaf ears. And so what I think has been helpful for us, and we have an incredible chief marketing officer who has really helped us to hone in on our language. And this, I think, came from her experience of being the CMO of Heifer, is Cindy helped us to simplify what we speak about in what our value proposition is. So being very clear about saying we empower people and protect the planet. That sounds very simple, but it's this idea of the more simple the statement you make, or even as Churchill would say, the shorter the letter you write, that means that you spent that much more time getting it to that conciseness. So I would say, the more simplified our messaging has become, the more it's resonated with both consumers and with the press.
So first of all, congratulations for building such a wonderful company and in doing this. Let me turn to this recent recognition that Fortune magazine has identified you as the world's 25 greatest leaders and heroes of the pandemic. Tell us a little bit about that. What happened? Take us back to March and walk us through what your company did and why was this honor bestowed on you?
Well, in early March, it became clear to the team that there was going to be a PPE shortage in the United States. And we thought, gosh, here we have a vetted and fully functional supply chain that's syndicated, meaning that we have suppliers in over 20 countries, which is critical because, as you know, so many countries at different times were shut down for work. And we thought, gosh, we have expertise in sourcing and manufacturing ethically. We have suppliers all over the world. Surely we can add value and help these hospital systems source and manufacture some of the critical PPE product that they need. And so we ended up sending out a request for proposals to our existing suppliers in mid-March, and thankfully got an overwhelmingly positive response. Not only that our suppliers were eager to help us in the United States, but also that they were also very, very, very excited about the opportunity to continue to provide work to those that work on the production line. Because as you all know, the retail industry really began to slow down significantly. And so orders were being canceled, new orders were not coming in. And so we then vetted the responses that we got from our suppliers and then began pitching that product that was available. So mostly masks and gowns, which is what we call a cut and sew product, which was within sort of our realm of expertise, given that we normally produce apparel, accessories, home goods. And we're overwhelmed by the positive response from hospitals that I think we're very grateful to have a partner that they could A, trust, and B, had expertise in international sourcing and manufacturing. Although I should add that one of the most exciting things that we've done during the time of procuring PPE is we've actually co-developed a level 2 isolation gown that's being 100% made in the United States, US fabric, having it treated, partnering with one of our union factory partners to not only create union jobs, but actually create a reusable level 2 isolation gown, which is a much more sustainable option, and it's made in the USA.
Wow, that's a great response. So, and clearly you had a setup to be able to pivot to this, and you clearly pivoted very, very quickly with this. Let me take you to fast forward a little bit and say, this is right now. You had a very successful operation before the pandemic. You certainly have adapted and really doing some great work during the pandemic to partner and supply important equipment and gowns and masks and PPE equipment overall. Hopefully, one of these days, this pandemic will be behind us. So walk us through the vision that you might have for the company beyond the pandemic. And if there would be any changes, do you believe this pandemic will change some of the operations that you have and the way you will be responding to it? What may be the new normal for the world?
Well, I think that this pandemic has unfortunately reminded companies of all sizes that it's critical to have a syndicated supply chain, meaning that the idea that one could source from a single factory or even a single country for all of their operational needs is really risky. So I'm excited that to the market's value proposition of a client being able to partner to the market and then having access to hundreds of vetted and approved suppliers will become even more important as people now realize not only do I need a backup to some of my primary factories, I need a backup to that backup because we cannot anticipate whether it's a pandemic, whether it is sort of political sort of constraints that are placed that significantly impact pricing, that it's always important to have as much sort of depth to your supply chain as possible. As it relates to the market's role in PPE, what we are most excited about is continuing to find ways to do two things. One is to allow the clients that are sourcing PPE to find sustainable solutions. So again, trying to continue to innovate and provide, for example, those reusable, those rewashable PPE items, both masks and gowns. Secondly, when whether it's a reusable or not, really continuing to help them drive opportunity, meaning production opportunity, to these non-traditional suppliers. So even if you're having to source a more disposable product, at least you're providing critical jobs to those who may be traditionally overlooked.
Great. So, I want to switch gears a little bit. You are certainly an example of a community leader overall. And I would just like your thoughts on what you consider are some of the important characteristics of a resilient leader, especially during a time of a crisis. And you have clearly demonstrated it in your work, but I would love to hear you articulate some of the characteristics that you feel that you have actually, clearly demonstrated and exhibited.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think that having worked the first part of my career in counterterrorism actually oddly prepared me well for crisis, because when there is a crisis, whether it's a personal crisis or it's a professional crisis, there are a number of responses that people can take, and ideally, you're able to move past sort of a frozen response, and you're able to sort of move yourself into action. And in the case of COVID, I think trying to be as level-headed as possible and asking, again, what do I need to do to bring my team through this time period? And my partners, meaning in our case, it was our suppliers, what do I need to do to help move all of the sort of constituents that touch my business through this time period? And I think that requires being very action-oriented and doing a lot of strategic planning and saying, what are the constraints that my team is going to feel right now? And then how can I help to address those? What are the constraints that my business partners, in our case, our suppliers, are going to face right now? And what can I do to address and alleviate some of those constraints? That tends to be sort of our MO when we think about responding to crisis or downturns or changes in the market. I think it's a function of saying, I need to remain true to my core value proposition, but what can I do to be nimble and be responsive and ultimately be supportive to allow everyone who makes the business go to be able to thrive.
Excellent. So I want to switch gears a bit, Jane. I know you have also authored a book. I believe it's called Buy the Change You Want to See, Use Your Purchasing Power to Make the World a Better Place. Tell us a little bit about the book. Tell us a little about what motivated you to write that book and what it is about.
Well, I had the opportunity to write a book with Penguin Random House about an idea that I feel so strongly about, and it's this idea of voting with your wallet. One of the things that I realized in developing to the market was how powerful market forces are and how capable market forces can be if leveraged to help address longstanding social justice issues. That could be around the economy, that could be around the environment. But when you look at the amount of resources, meaning literally total value associated with the market versus philanthropic giving, oftentimes you can have a bigger impact by leveraging the market than you can by solely relying on the public sector, whether that's the not-for-profit space or that's the government. And so the idea of Buy the Change You Want to See is really a call to action to people from all walks of life, every side of the aisle, all socioeconomic levels, all sort of belief systems. It's this idea that if you have values that you would like to see advanced, then think about who you spend your money with and how you spend your money. Because if, for example, I feel strongly about continuing to advance the role of women in society, then an easy way for me to help do that is by supporting women-owned and operated businesses. If you feel strongly about bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States, then think about supporting Made in the USA product. So it's just this idea of saying, what are my values? And then how do I align my purchasing power to help advance these values?
Well, I can tell you that there are so many clear lessons in our conversation today for any budding entrepreneurs and how to be able to organize. I want to kind of zone in on one particular aspect in the book. I believe you talk a little bit about the importance of family, upbringing in shaping your beliefs. So can you expand on that a little bit, on how that has helped and what's that about?
Well, family is where it starts. I'm very, very, very grateful that I had parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc., that really, to me, modeled public service and just service in general. This idea that we are on this planet to serve others. And so I watched both my parents, whether they were serving in the public sector, meaning in government, or they were starting nonprofits, which both of them did, that it was really not only, I want to say beyond an obligation, it's actually an exciting opportunity. If you are fortunate enough to be in a place where you can add value, that doing so is astonishingly fulfilling, because you're sort of aligning your passion with something that is having a positive impact on the life of other, and it really can bring life such deep meaning. And so, yes, I speak in quite detail about how fortunate I feel that I had parents and grandparents that modeled for me that ultimately life is about service to others.
Excellent, and I know you have in this conversation actually talked a little bit about some of the things you've written in your book as well. I believe you had written about how scarcity can be a driver of creativity, which is maybe my easier way for me to remember that was necessity is the mother of invention, and I think you've demonstrated by asking the questions of whys and whatnot. Clearly, you have had a very fulfilling vision and compelling vision, and you have very fulfilling kind of experience with your activities. You are also, your husband is also a very successful entrepreneur, and he himself is running a big software company and Rubicon. You both are really contributing to society a lot and are very busy people. And I would love for us to hear a little bit about how, especially during when two type A personalities who are really trying to make a big difference in the world are under lockdown or are under this kind of scenario, how does that work, and how do you find that balance to still be able to go gung-ho and work hard and still find a balance with other responsibilities that come with a lockdown and with the pandemic? And I would love to hear your thoughts on some of that balance, and perhaps some ideas for our viewers today on how they might be able to handle it better themselves.
Well, yes, as you noted, my husband is also an entrepreneur, so there is no shortage of personality in this house. But I think what has been helpful for us, even pre-pandemic, given that we both keep very tight schedules, is just this idea of loving what you do. And that is a luxury. To be able to say that. But again, when I think about those who are exploring, starting something, gosh, you've just got to just love the heck out of whatever you want to do. If you want to start an organization and build an organization around it, because it's exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting. It's physically exhausting. You will have daily, if not hourly, depending on what I'm doing, rejection and people telling you that your idea is no good. So I think in many respects, the fact that we both have companies is helpful because, if I have someone that gives me negative feedback, that's oftentimes negative feedback that he's heard in the past as well. Or if he's asking me to read something that is, going out to his investors or going out, to the public, I can look at it at the lens, through the lens of also being a CEO. So in many ways, that's been very complementary. From a work-life balance standpoint, that can always be very challenging because the tendency is, especially if you are an owner in a company, whether they're outside stakeholders or not, the tendency is if I'm not working, I'm letting the company or organization suffer. And what I think both he and I have come to learn, although not easily, is that we have to sort of sharpen our sword, meaning we have to take time for self-care. Otherwise, we become blunt instruments, meaning we become less and less effective leaders because we are short-tempered or we're missing things in the way that we're writing or reading or communicating. And so really carving out time to allow us to rest. And that for me, for example, is, I've turned into a walking queen. I'm walking sometimes 5, 6, 7 miles a day just to have time to be by myself and to sort of blow off steam. And of course, during COVID, to get out of the house. And so doing self-care is not a luxury, I guess is my point. It's actually a necessity. And it's, one of the sort of examples that I would give to my husband about this idea, because I think it makes it easier to understand when you contextualize it this way, is the idea of always being on at 100% and not resting as an entrepreneur, as a leader, is similar to the idea of an Olympian operating and running, for example, at the same speed that, of being in the actual race every single day and not actually doing physical therapy or not, taking rest days. And when you hear it that way, you're like, of course, physically, it would make no sense for a professional athlete to not do the physical therapy, to not take those rest days. They can't perform the same way if they're running the exact same speed every day. But oftentimes when it's mental, meaning, intellectual sort of firepower, we sometimes struggle to realize how important it is to turn off. And ultimately, I think what can help with that is just stopping and focusing on gratitude and asking, really sort of taking time. I have a journal that I write in either in the morning or at night where I have 3 things that I write that I'm appreciative of that are not related to me, meaning, I got, a really lovely note from somebody, or the woman at the coffee shop smiled at me. And then 3 things that I'm grateful for about myself. I am grateful that I'm such a good cat mom. I am grateful that, I made time to call my grandmother. So doing some of that sort of self-care and some of that gratitude work, I think all helps to put you in a better place to be a more effective leader.
Thank you, Jane. This has been very much, it's an amazing, I have had an amazing time talking to you. And of course, there's a lot of good advice, a lot of good lessons, and a lot of good, demonstrated kind of things there where you have exhibited in your answers. Thank you again for joining us today. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Dean.
Once more, thank you. And also for the rest, for those of you who are watching, please, this is a special summer series of George Talks Business will continue. And I believe our next guest or the team that we will be talking to is on June 10th. And we'll be talking to the one of the winning teams of the GW New Venture Competition, People Powered Doors. So we look forward to June 10th and hope you will all join us. Until then, please stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much for joining again.